welcome back to Psychedelics Weekly. Joe and Kyle. How are you doing today, Kyle?
Pretty good. We may also have a little bit of a co-host here, too.
We'll introduce her shortly. And today we're doing our regular weekly news roundup, things we found that were under-discussed, worth discussing on the show. And yeah, it's going to be a fun one. But before we dig in, can you give us a little bit of an update on the neuroscience course, Kyle?
Yeah, so demystifying neuroscience, if this is your first time hearing about it or if you've heard about it, well, we're going to tell you again. This is a course, hybrid course that's coming up. You'll get some pre-recorded material. This is going to be led by Dr. Melanie Pincus and Manesh Gurn. And then we're going to kick it off with some live Zoom calls. And this class kicks off on May 17th. It'll be the 17th, 24th, 31st, June 7th, June 14th, the 21st, 28th, July 5th. That's when it will wrap up. And that's from 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or Eastern Daylight Time, and then 4 p.m. to 4:30 Pacific Daylight Time. So, yeah, we're going to be closing off sales soon, so definitely get in. And just a little bit of the curriculum. So it's going to be an introduction to neuroscience and psychedelics, the neuropsychological paradigm of psychedelic therapy, 2 modules on psychedelic pharmacology, cellular and peripheral therapeutic mechanisms, experiential circuit and large-scale neuroimaging therapeutic mechanisms, the science of set and setting, and psychedelics and human potential. That one sounds cool.
Nice. Yeah, and I'm excited about that one. I hope I can take a bunch of it, if not all of it. TBD, though. Yeah, and pretty good enrollment so far. We're on track to sell out, so if you want to secure a spot, please do sooner than later. And we won't really expand that one at their discretion. Yeah, and it's to be determined if we're going to do this on a recurring basis with them. So if you want that experience of live class time with Manesh and Melanie, do jump in.
They're rock stars, and if anybody hasn't listened to Manesh or Melanie, go back into our podcast. And I've always appreciated Manesh and his way of breaking things down and just simplifying neuroscience, because it can get really complex and confusing, and I think he does a really great job. Both him and Melanie both do. So you can learn more at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And again, class kicks off on May 17th.
Hell yeah. And I did a quick trip to New York recently for Trailblazers. It was an interesting kind of industry conference where business leaders, policy people, and more show up, investors and longtime veterans in the space, all kind of show up to talk about cannabis and psychedelics. And I got on stage. I moderated a panel with Josh Capel, Courtney Barnes, and come on, Joe. Good Lord. Haven't slept enough since then, I guess. But it was a really good panel. Oh, it was Tim Schlitt from Palo Santo Ventures. He was fun. Yeah, it was a good panel, and it was nice because primarily it was all people I like.
Yeah.
And I find that, it's not always the case you like people you're on stage with or have any kind of relationship with. So that was cool. We got to give a really strong update on Colorado that was of interest.
Anything particular there with Colorado? I know we've covered it a bunch. But.
So the that late stage edition from the Senate president, Colorado Senate president, that was going to come in and effectively gut the bill. That's how I read it. It was a 90-page thing, just pretty much adding a lot of definition, and it was a lot of definition that we did not vote for. It was pretty much nope, ayahuasca facilitators can't get remunerated, you have to actually grow in a really specific type of container now. I can't really do a good update because I don't actually know if it's been finalized yet. But we'll have somebody on soon to give us a full Colorado rundown, I think, on the positive.
Oh, awesome.
I think they moved up the timeline for Iboga as a regulated service.
I do remember seeing that, yeah. I remember me and David were chatting on last Psychedelic Weekly about that and the potential there because of the, opioid, epidemic and how that could really save people.
And the price point on that, everybody should realize it costs the city or, whatever government goes to respond to an overdose to grab a body. I think it's somewhere $15,000 to $50,000 per dead body that they have to go pick up. Treatment costs a lot less than that. So by implementing Iboga therapy, even if the government paid for it, the government would start saving money. if done properly. That's my position on the situation there. Anything going on with Vital?
Let's see. We just had Dr. Erica Dick present on the history of LSD and psychedelics this week, so that was really fun. Just digging into that old history up in Canada that people sometimes forget about, using LSD for those using alcohol and trying to reduce drinking. So yeah, always a pleasure. Really fun. We're in week 3 right now, so we're off to the races.
Yeah, it's on. It's great. Erica is always amazing. Love hearing her present. And the view on history is always amazing. And I think the key point I always mention is I think in Saskatchewan, Canada, LSD was the treatment of choice for a long time for alcohol use disorder. So amazing. And I can't say that about anywhere else in the world because I haven't heard that stat. All right, on with the news. We're going to review of the first article ever by Elle.com, ELLE.com. Elle? Probably just Elle. Titled, Shrooms Are the New Cali Sober. So really suggesting that people are using mushrooms instead of alcohol. And I thought it was a decent article. It had some good quotes. Do you have any major takeaways?
I guess just, it's highlighting, people are kind of moving towards this different type of lifestyle, and including, cannabis and mushrooms and microdosing into their life, and maybe not having as much stigma. So when we think about like a lifestyle of abstinence, right, like trying to use any of these substances would be, it would be probably looked down upon, right? And so, I think it is kind of helping to shift a narrative of people are using this for health and wellness, and trying to maybe better their life. There was a quote in here that made me kind of chuckle. Here's this quote. Microdosing owner and mother of 2 in San Diego, quote, if my kids ask, do you want a craft? I'm like, no. But if I eat some mushrooms and suddenly I'm Martha fucking Stewart. Kind of ridiculous, but I don't know. It's interesting. We've talked about this, a few episodes ago, of moms microdosing and making them better parents. It does seem to be that stigma, like, oh, are you getting high around your kids or this or that? And obviously you have to be super careful around that whole conversation with, like, DCF, maybe getting your children taken away. Are you a responsible parent? Is this neglect? Is this abuse? But there is something like really interesting about how people are maybe using these medicines, these plants, to try to improve their life. And, should we always be shaming? If there is, abuse, risk, and stuff like that happening, and people aren't, being great parents and putting a child in danger, yeah, certainly, I think that's an issue. But, if people are using it responsibly and it is making them better parents and more connected with their children and spending more time with them, I mean, I think that's huge. Working with a lot of teenagers in my early career, like hearing the suffering of, like, my parents are never around, they're too worried about this, like they don't spend time. I remember this one person was saying, my dad just flies all around places, like, will take me on vacations, but he's never there for me emotionally. And it's like, to really think about that and how much of an impact that has on children and teenagers. Like, I mean, that was tough to hear a lot of that stuff when you really think about, like, to really be there emotionally for people, for your children, and how does that have an effect as you grow up? I mean, just, if you're listening, think about maybe your relationship with your parents. Not everybody has, there's always something in those relationships, some better than others. But, what if they were there for you a little bit more emotionally? It's important.
So this article did a good job talking about research at NYU and Hopkins, talking about smoking cessation, major depressive disorder, and also reduction of drinking at NYU. And it also talked about the use of magic mushrooms. So in 2015, the Global Drug Survey reported 8.6% of respondents had used magic mushrooms. And in 2021, it roughly doubled to 16.1%.
Found that to be interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
And it goes towards like this idea that people are going to find solutions for themselves that are better, despite like the market wanting to shape, maybe you should be going and drinking a whole bunch. Like that's what the market wants you to do. But really, it's cheaper and healthier to, kind of micro a little bit. We'll call it mini a little bit. And but can you do it all the time? Like how often can you do it? I don't know. It's an open question in my book. Like people should be careful. Shouldn't do it too much. Did this article also suggest cardiac risk?
I don't remember seeing anything like that.
There was one of these articles that did. I forget which one. And it's not in the notes here. So yeah, like one of these articles is a little underhanded in that, but they're trying to do journalism. They're trying to be fair. Like the data is really like there's no evidence of cardiac risk from mushrooms. So like there's speculation, and we should be careful, but we haven't seen this yet. So there's a good quote from Julie Holland in here. When compared to alcohol, the benefits are clear. Mushrooms are anti-inflammatory, promote neuroplasticity, are non-toxic to the liver and brain, aka no hangovers, not particularly addictive, and because they don't cause the munchies, there's no added calories. That's fair. But of course, she also notes that mushrooms are still illegal in 49 of 50 states. Experiences can be heavily influenced by the setting or one's mood, and it could be harder to stay safe in an altered state when you are distracted by beautiful traffic lights. Yeah, true. So,
the next paragraph after that did go over the microdosing might damage the heart over time. So let's go back to that kind of hypothesis around the 5-HT2B receptor, and repeated activation of that could lead to heart valve thickening.
Yeah. Like the famous cases are fen-phen, where people were eating a lot of fen-phen, and so they're getting a lot of really strong binding, and people were having that reaction. In this case, you're eating a small amount of mushrooms, and hopefully you're not doing it every day. So something to think about.
Yeah.
So just really good to see another mainstream mag covering this. I'm hopeful. You see an article like this in a really popular magazine like that, and you're like, okay, we're probably not going away anytime too soon.
No, it seems like it's just accelerating culturally, which is exciting and also a little nerve-wracking at times.
So while I was at Trailblazers, people mistook me for a sports fan.
Really?
And I'm like, ESPN, I've heard of it. Apparently there's a show on there, E60. And this article is from ESPN newsroom.com or ESPNpressroom.com. New ESPN E60 examines use of psychedelics in mental health treatment of athletes by Andy Hall. But this has been something we've been on for a bit, and it's really kind of cool that ESPN's picking it up. Athletes are pragmatic. They're not necessarily ones to wait for clinical trials before injecting or using different substances for an edge, right? And it shows that like the safety profile of psychedelics is there for them to want to go here, right?
Right. Yeah.
What did you pick up here?
Yeah, and I'm wondering, what's driving them to do that? I'm wondering, is it for mental health reasons? Is it also, I think a lot of these athletes are also like probably sustaining head injuries, right? And there's a lot of folks saying that it's possibly helping out with those symptoms. But I'm excited to see this documentary. I just saw that it aired on April 22nd. There's a 30-second clip at that website, E60, and it looks interesting, right? It kind of starts off like, you think when you think of psychedelics, you just think of hippies, right? But not thinking about NFL players, NHL players going down and finding healing. I think that culturally, I wonder how that lands for a lot of people, because when we think of sports, we think of like dominant masculine energy. To then go and use these medicines, these substances, to maybe turn inward and think about who they are, and to do some healing. And so I don't know, I think that's really interesting. You maybe see like these very strong macho masculine men go down to get healing. I mean, it's the same thing as the vet population too, right? And maybe that helps to shift the narrative around, like, what does it mean to deal with your emotions as a man?
I immediately went Jungian, and I'm like, okay, if the idea is like conjunction of opposites, and then we can bring the masculine and the feminine closely together, perhaps they could be better performers.
Yeah.
Perhaps. Other people might find out, oh, yeah, I really never liked this. So you got to be careful. But yeah, it's just good to see this. It's streaming on ESPN Plus. That's cool. And there's this guy, Riley Cote, retired NHL player, who's one of the biggest advocates of psychedelics. We should get him on the show. And some other retired pro athletes were accompanied to Jamaica, where they participated in a psilocybin retreat, which is cool. It's harrowing to do that on camera.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It also doesn't always make good footage, right? Like, I turned down that one group that wanted to do it for TV. They wanted me to facilitate on TV, but they wanted it their way. And I just had to say no. I would have been on Netflix, everybody, but I said no. Because, it just looked like, why misrepresent something when you don't have to?
Yeah.
And the documentary also discusses the use of psychedelics and the history of use in the U.S., pros and cons of them as mental health treatments, and what impacts they have on athletes, and more science around psychedelics. And it's a pretty good roster here. So retired boxer Mike Lee, former NHL player Steve Downey, NHL CFL Justin Renfro, Gould Lynn, who's an amazing Hopkins neuroscientist, Scott Anderson, Chief Science Officer Shepard Pratt. I don't know them, actually. Oregon State mycologist Jesse Ulig, hopefully, PhD, and Albert Garcia Romeu, PhD from Hopkins. We've never had him on, right?
No, we should. Yeah, he's definitely been on the list for a while.
Major contributor to the space. Tyler McLeod, co-founder and CXO of Wake Network. Jeff LaPratt from Shepard Pratt. I just wish I knew what Shepard Pratt was. And Daniel Weinerberg from the Lieber Institute for Brain Development. So, good roster. And hopefully it turns on this whole kind of ESPN head idea of, hey, yeah, you're still a man, even though you're watching ESPN and not playing the games. Like, how do you want to be more like them and seek healing for yourself too?
Well, and I think it probably brings up a lot of curiosity. Like, I never really followed sports. I was more of a swimmer, snowboarder, skateboarder. Never really kind of followed sports. But, it's interesting, like, when Aaron Rodgers came out, I mean, my dad is like a hardcore Packers fan, like hardcore cheesehead. And I mean, as soon as he heard that news, he was like asking me questions. And obviously he knows what I do, but it was just like, just more curiosity around it. It's like, my lead quarterback here at the Packers is talking about this thing. What's going on? And just so curious. He's always like, oh, I see he's going to that conference you're going to in June. And, he's like so excited about it. I think that's kind of interesting how that might like impact those folks that are so involved in sports, that may not even be thinking about it, that all of a sudden they get kind of turned on to this and go, what is that? At least just spark some curiosity. I think that's important.
Yeah. So onward to Oregon. This article from W Week. What is that? The Week? Probably Willamette Week. So wweek.com. Willamette's a famous kind of wine valley area in Oregon. It's also where the Center for Process Studies moved from Claremont, California to there. So, article title: Oregon's appetite for psilocybin is being fed outside the law in the mushroom underground, by Anthony Effinger. So, yeah, of course. Of course. Like, if there's a lack of access to something, the black market's going to try to figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah, so they're saying, despite the legalization of psilocybin therapy in Oregon, the underground market for mushrooms is thriving. No service centers have opened yet. As of April 25th, no service centers have been licensed, and only 3 manufacturers, 1 testing lab, and 4 facilitators have been licensed, which, we kind of knew that this was going to take a while to roll out. And since... Oh man, I always forget the measures. Measure 109 was a psilocybin bill. Measure 110 was the decrim bill, right?
They always change the numbers though, so 109 for our purposes here.
Okay, cool. Yeah, they're able to do this in this kind of decrim model, and obviously people are gonna go down that route if there are no service centers available, and there's going to be this bottleneck. So it does make sense.
Right. And the regulated frame is always going to make prices higher, right? But it's also safer. And we have to allow people, I think, to make their own adult decisions about where is their risk tolerance, given their life situation, right? Yeah. So there's going to be limits to that for sure, fortunately and unfortunately. But yeah, like this one operator here, Kathy Jonas from Epic Healing, Eugene, it's looking like a $3,500 a session cost. And it's a lot of money that Kathy's put in here. I think the article says 60 grand to open it, and she's expecting to barely break even. So yeah, like this is something that we really need to consider when new states are coming online. Like, how much regulation are you putting in place, and is it too much for the program you're putting in place to even operate? So I would say when other states are looking at this, they should be heavily interviewing people who are on the ground, right? People who are trying to open clinics or open schools like us, or have grow locations or testing labs, right? So what was the best part? What was the worst part? What would make your business a lot more viable? Things like that, because we don't want people wasting money on businesses that are going to fail. It's not really helpful for anybody.
And I guess you guys kind of saw this in cannabis early on. I remember watching that show, High Profits, and just talking about the licensing fees, all the stuff that was going in there, even though you're bringing in all this money, barely making any profit, which is kind of mind blowing because of all the regulation that's in place. And, when people are struggling and they're trying to find healing, they are going to go and find what's around.
Yeah. If someone's sick and in Oregon or Idaho or Washington or Northern California, why wouldn't they go, to a regulated place if they were safety and, cautious, safety minded and really cautious, right? So, yeah, I'm thinking show could have almost been called Not So High Profits. It worked out fine in the end, but it was a catastrophe. And people haven't seen that, go check that out. It's about Breckenridge. And I'm in the movie. I won't tell you where. I'm in the series, only for about a second.
You get a little cameo.
Yeah. I should probably find that. So, yeah, the regulated market created by 109, this article says it's just not going to satisfy the demand. And I can't say that 109 created the demand and the appetite, which is what this magazine wants to suggest. I think the demand was there. It just became oh shit, now I don't have to buy from that guy. I could go somewhere in a regulated thing and do it, in this way.
Well, I think it allows people to come out of the closet a little bit more and talk about it, right? If psilocybin is legal in that adult use model, and personal possession of many substances are decriminalized in Oregon. I mean, people are able to maybe talk about and maybe explore their options a little bit more than fearing arrest and prosecution, right? Mm-hmm. So, maybe to some degree it's created a little bit, but I think loosening those laws, people feel more comfortable exploring it. Then just think about a parent has got kids and, kind of trying to protect stuff. And then, laws, they're oh, okay, maybe I can push this edge a little bit more. Maybe I won't spend time in jail. And that's important.
Yeah. And this line here is good. And this tracks with something I've experienced. they actually set a limit at the state level of how much you can administer orally. Orally is the only route of administration that's viable or legal in the state. 5-gram equivalent, which is not enough for many people. There's a lot of people on psychiatric meds that just won't even feel 5 grams. Like I recall this one woman who was on a lot of psych meds who ate 14 grams and she barely felt it. Fascinating. I was there for that one. So yeah, there's people who are excluded by a lot of these things, and people that are thinking about other states should really focus on inclusion. And, they set 5 grams as like a safety limit, but really what they did was make sure that certain people can't get help in this framework.
Right. Yeah. I wonder if they would like add an exception to that though. If people are on medications, if they're able to like up their dosing. I'm surprised there like wasn't any sort of amendment there for that.
It would be interesting if Oregon Health Authority or HECC, it's probably Oregon Health Authority would be the partner that would like approve those things, but that's not part of the bill as far as I understand it. It's too bad. So Colorado regulators, please think carefully about that. Selling spores. Yeah. So as I always say, like for 20, 30, $50, you could probably be growing mushrooms forever. And like, how does that juxtapose with this regulated frame that's like pretty expensive? And some people are still the article goes into a religious case, the Silo Temple. This guy is doing an annual membership of $44, which is amazing. And that's pretty inclusive. That's way cheaper than $3,500, and way less bureaucratic if they're safe, right? Like religions, there's always a little bit of an edge because they're definitely breaking the law federally without getting approval. Like theoretically, ostensibly, you have the right. It's in the Constitution. It's right up there, top one. So theoretically, you're protected by the Constitution. Practically speaking, they can still lock you up. So you want to really make sure your congregation understands these risks and that you are breaking federal law, especially if you're mailing these things over state lines. And it's a very similar critique to the Church of Silent Methoxin. It's just disclose the risks. Be really clear about the risks. Otherwise,
you're putting people at harm, and right? It's like
right. Like one of my good friends could have gone away for many, many years because this religious leader did not disclose enough info, and in fact shaped the narrative in a way that wasn't lovely. Yeah. So there's some good quotes in here. Nate Howard co-founded Intertrack. Says the underground has been thriving from the start. That's what made it possible for Measure 109 to collect backers enough for the bill to pass. Erica Zelfand, ND, I think she's a naturopath. She works at Intertrack, though I think she's living out of the country now. What's the incentive for somebody to actually want to do this work above ground when they can go underground and make it much more accessible? I think the other part of that is, more profitable too. And she just, want to lean on accessibility. So yeah, like there's mismatched incentives with reality. There's minimal enforcement budget. Like, and should we actually be enforcing this? Probably not. I don't know what the right answer is, but I think the answer is probably no. And another one, I think from Erica, depending on their expectations, many graduates of Oregon's training programs are getting dunked right now. They stumped up thousands for training and have no place to practice. Yeah, and that's an integrity and marketing issue. I hope Intertrack and other groups were really straightforward about what this was going to look like when they graduated, especially these early cohorts. Because there's no place to actually do the trip sitting. There's room for you as a trained person to practice now, right? Like, you can help people prepare. You can help people integrate, plan. There's a lot of things that after you took all this training, you're now well equipped to do. It's just not exactly what you thought you were going to do.
Right. Yeah. You're not some programs, like you're not getting a license to facilitate in a place where the infrastructure isn't there. Right. Like there's tons of people that really need integration support. They're like, obviously people probably find me from the MAPS list, but it's like people are fine. I need help, like I had this experience. I need to chat with somebody. And so there's so much room for that. And we actually, I think, need that type of education for kind of creating that safety net for folks, because people are doing this in the underground. As these places are decriminalizing it, people are feeling like they're going to take on that risk a little bit more. And what is that safety net that we're creating for the community, like for everybody? And so educators, therapists, doctors, we all have like a role to play in educating people, and that's going to be really important for helping to shift the narrative, right? I think the main concern that a lot of people have is that this is going to be the Wild West, and there's going to be things that go extremely wrong. Media is going to grab attention of it, and the 1960s are going to happen all over again, and it's going to get shut down. I don't know. Cat's out of the bag. We have the internet now. It's such a different time. People have so much access to information. Can we put that cat back in the bag? I don't know. The government and stuff, seems like they sometimes can do what they want with things. So it is a possibility. But again, I think having a lot of educated and trained people out there to help people make more informed decisions, stay safe, learning how to there's so many people that don't know even how to vet like retreat facilities. Underground facilitators don't know what questions to ask, and that's where a lot of that risk comes into play, right? So if you can help people make more informed decisions, hopefully we lower the risk. And I think that's really operating in that harm reduction paradigm, and we need that. We definitely need that.
So a big conversation in the cannabis world is about how illicit growers, like legacy operators, are undercutting regulated cannabis in a really difficult way and problematic way for a lot of that industry. And I get that. I also think the regulation that was set up made that happen. It's not the case that because legal cannabis comes, it's not necessarily the case that because legal cannabis is here, that the black market's going to be here or not here. It's like there has to be incentives and some reason why, people, like the taxation is wild. And then also like product quality is not the best because of a lot of the hoops they have to jump through, and like the margins they have to maintain because they can't even do like tax, like any kind of tax write-offs, federally speaking. So, there's a lot there, and we're going to be doing the same thing in psychedelics. It's just do we see black market or like bootleg alcohol very often anymore? Like that's kind of like a weird fringe thing.
Yeah.
And like
I don't know if I would drink bootleg alcohol.
You can get pretty hurt.
Yeah. You're drinking some moonshine and going blind.
My little brother for a little bit had a still, and he was doing some stuff. It was interesting. It was more to like learn. He wasn't trying to sell it at scale or anything, but it's an interesting deal. But are we forcing people to unregulated landscapes due to our need for safety and our perhaps like way bigger need for safety in these bills than we actually need? And are we causing other problems? Like how many, say for example, MDMA became legal, but it was like, $500 per dose at Walmart, because I love talking about Walmart. And but your buddy down the street selling it for $10 a dose, like you're gonna think really carefully about going and buying that black market drug over the legal one. And that's the problem we have to solve. So I want to urge people to also, we need to be careful, but we also need to be careful with how much regulation we put in, because we're going to be making the underground bigger if we do that. And we want to make pathway towards amnesty, kind of like immigration, right? It's like, how do we get these amazing people who've been at it forever to come forward and play in this above ground frame?
Right. Yeah, it's that tricky thing, right? Like regulation can help to create like safer supply, safer services. But yeah, if it's too much, people aren't going to want to participate. And it was really interesting listening to some of the meetings in Colorado and hearing some of the lawmakers just like kind of go back and forth about the implementation of 122, and trying to learn from cannabis. And that's got to be confusing as like a politician to be in there and like think about like, how do we implement this and protect the community? And they probably don't know much about it, right? So these decisions are getting made, and probably just not really knowing much, but also that responsibility of how do we protect the community, how do we protect everybody, and how do we implement this in a safe way where people aren't maybe getting in cars and driving and getting in accidents, or people aren't so many different scenarios. People getting abused in the underground. Creating an above ground place is great, but abuse happens in the above ground too. But at least maybe there's places to report people or take people's license away. But I don't know. Yeah, it's complicated. I don't because there's so much like benefit, I think, in those community models for accessibility. And when we think about just like healing, coming together in groups and communities, it's really healing. I think that's what I really appreciate about breath work. It's like coming together in a group container, being able to explore together, be able to listen to everybody's stories instead of doing some like individual like work. Individual work's important, but there's something so awesome about being in that community. And it was accessible too. It was like, okay, I'm a broke college student, but I can afford to go to these workshops still somehow. And that was huge for me. It was really big. So instead of thinking like, oh, I'm going to go to like this group therapy with psilocybin and spend, I don't know, like a couple $1,000s, versus like going to like a community thing with breath work and it's like $200 or something like that. It's like, that's a big difference.
Yeah. The question is like, how far should state and federal governments go to keep people safe, as opposed to like setting up some guideposts where some people can get injured? But if you're playing smart, you very, very likely are never going to get hurt. And I don't know if I sent you this, but it's the slogan on the first ever U.S. coin.
Oh, I think I saw that in your IG stories.
It's not in God we trust. It's mind your business. And like, yeah, it's gone out of vogue. Everybody I know. But like, here's the example. Broken screen, shitty screen.
If you're watching this on YouTube.
Yeah. If you want to check it out, it's horrible. Yeah. So, you can find it in my stories. The account was Yup That Exists with a couple dots in there. And, are we trying to nerf the world, or are we trying to help a lot of people? Like sometimes it's okay that you broke your toe or broke your arm or my shoulder in my case. Like after my accident, like none of the ski resorts closed down this year. Right. And I could have died for sure. So like one or two cases of like really bad stories, like people are just really reactionary to new things. Right. I think this feels really new, feels really uncomfortable.
Yeah, and you just bringing that whole thing back up, I think it kind of gets into this whole thing around politics of experience, and maybe being afraid of like these new experiences, especially when it comes to like
is it Fritz Perls?
No, politics of experience might have been it's on the tip of my tongue. Lang.
I can never remember his name either. Artie Lang.
Yeah. Just thinking about like needing to contain people's experiences when, if it's really about public safety, do we get rid of cars? Do we close down?
Make you wear helmets in your car?
Yeah. Do we get rid of like all the fast food chains? Do we close down ski resorts? I definitely could not be here right now. And, how many people die on the mountain? A year. I don't know, probably lots. It's a very, very risky sport, and I continue to wonder why I get back on that snowboard.
It's so fucking fun. So like alcohol, like so many people die every year. Tobacco, so many people die every year. Opiates, you'd be plenty safe, but you'd be in terrible pain. Like there's the pendulum has gone too far the other way, where people that really need it can't get it. So like regulators, like there's minimal accountability there. We need to hold them to account more. This is why I'm really excited about the PAC. Psychedelic Medicine PAC. We can like put people in and hold them accountable, and Yeah, like otherwise they're just like, yeah, whatever. It's one of 10, 20,000 issues I'm supposed to be looking at this year.
Yeah, and I wonder how, like, I'm sure there's tons of reports around, like, the safety of cannabis and the dangers of cannabis as more states become rec, and just thinking about, like, how has that really impacted communities? Because, I mean, yeah, sometimes cannabis can be super, super overwhelming and psychedelic. My gosh, some of the experiences I've had felt like full-blown like ayahuasca experiences at times, and it was like, you know, being in a public setting, and I'm like, oh, what's going on here, you know, and yeah, you know, we don't hear too much about that. I mean, you know, there's probably people are getting in trouble and doing dumb shit, but you know, has that had a big negative impact on communities and states?
Unlikely, and it's always going to be more used than mushrooms.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I know the data a little bit, and it's like 10-15% drop in drinking once an area goes recreationally legal. And then teen cannabis use drops substantially after it goes legal for rec. So, like, two big wins. Like, we for sure know that younger people probably shouldn't be smoking, you know, unless there's a real medical need.
Yeah.
Or using cannabis generally. So, something we need to, you know, talk about, and nuance needs to be part of this thing. Like, it feels so like we're in 2023 right now, and like how politics is moving, it's so damn slow. It's so behind the times that how should we relate to it? And it just a big question, you know. And you know what we didn't even name here is you can take these trainings, and then you're licensed, and you could put your license at risk if you wanted to by offering services at home or like outside of a regulated frame. So, and what's the incentive for people not doing it? There's a little bit of legal risk. So yeah, people just need to, you know, consider many implications. There's always going to be unexpected consequences. What do they call that? Emergent phenomenon from complex systems. Like, that's always going to be a thing. No way around it. But we can try our best. And like, this was predictable. You know, I don't see why we couldn't predict this with Oregon.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of us were thinking that, like, there's definitely going to be delays in licenses, supply chain, like even when this goes into effect, you know, when do people start growing? How long does it take to train people? How long does it take for service centers to get up and running? You know, we kind of called a delay. But, you know, does that mean, you know, you shouldn't work towards it still?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think people that live there should definitely be playing in that sandbox. Yeah. People from outside the state, if you want to, go for it, and just realize it's not a gangbusters investment the way you might have thought it was. Yeah.
I mean, I think it is important to create that diverse ecosystem, right? Like, some people are going to really need those services, and they do want that container. And so, you know, I think there is a lot of kind of like negative energy around like Oregon, especially with like synthesis. And then, you know, it's like one thing after another. And yeah, people covering like, oh, you can't get jobs now. But, you know, you still work towards that. Like, it's important to develop these systems for people.
Those articles drove me crazy.
Yeah, we have to think about the long game here.
Yeah, of course you can't get a job. Like, this is a first time that's ever been done in the world. Like, of course. And it's going to take a little bit of time. Like, what should have happened, I don't know if it did. I'm sure there was some of it. The educator should be telling people before they even pay that, hey, the timelines aren't guaranteed here. Mm-hmm. It's not a predictable situation. And yeah, hopefully that happened. And, you know, we do that with our students. What can you expect? What can you not expect? And I just hope everybody else does that. It's a part of consent.
I always remind people, if you want to work in the field of psychedelics, be comfortable with being uncomfortable and chaos and just uncertainty. We have no idea like what's going to unfold sometimes.
So some other big news here from mapsbcorp.com. The funny URL. So that's the group that actually makes the MDMA, and will be the for-profit that's wholly owned by MAPS. So the American Medical Association to issue first new code for psychedelic therapies. This is a press release, no real author. It looks like Compass and MAPS got together and worked with the feds to develop a CPT, which means current procedural terminology code. And it's category 3 code. I don't really know what that means.
That's for like new emerging type of therapies and interventions.
Cool. And it looks like they got it through. It was approved by the AMA, which also keeps free healthcare down, by the way. And I think that's a big win that it was approved. And the code was created, with MAPS and Compass. And it provides a means for clinicians, physicians, and healthcare pros to seek reimbursement for delivering psychedelic therapies. Details should be released in July and will go into effect in January. The other J. Yeah. January 1, 2024. And this quote from Amy Emerson, who heads up MAPS PBC. Strong collaborations like this one demonstrate that by working together, we can move closer to our collective goal of helping people currently underserved by existing treatments for mental health conditions. And I agree. Yeah, like we need more unity. Like those companies couldn't be more different, MAPS and Compass, and they were able to work together.
Yeah. Which is great, thinking about trying to get this included in healthcare systems, right? We're talking about all these different systems and operating, but the reality is that, I would love to see FDA-approved therapies on the market. So if people want to go down that route, they can go down that route. And to get this approved and hopefully get insurance reimbursement, that's going to be huge. We need that. So I think this is awesome. Yeah, this really blew up in the past 2 days. I think every psychedelic account was publishing it and posting about it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, it's still early. We don't have all the information, as Joe just mentioned. There will be more info released in the future. But I think this is a good first step. And I'm also thinking too around this might also help with some standardization and trainings, and helping that part get a little bit more unified as well. And just to get that acceptance from the AMA, I think that's huge. I think getting acceptance from those higher boards is a really big deal. It means that the narrative shifting, these boards are becoming more open, and that's what's going to change policy over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the AMA is extraordinarily conservative, so this is definitely a big move, and it's going to bleed out into the rest of the world, as a result of what we're doing here, and that's amazing.
I remember I was outreaching to some CME co-sponsors in the past, and I reached out to 5-6 different co-sponsor organizations, and some of the feedback I did get was, we can't approve your course titles because it isn't medically approved, and this is still experimental, and AMA doesn't approve it, and this and that. And so, it's going to be slow, and just getting this code approved probably isn't going to, create such massive change right away, but it's a small step towards getting more acceptance within these fields. And then just think about people aren't getting any education in this stuff in their traditional training, and by this getting accepted over time and groups starting to work together, how does that start to become more integrated into training, which I think is so important.
Yeah, it would make a big difference if psychiatry students could understand this stuff, and medical doctors could too. So coming. So nice work, Maps and Compass there. Next up, from psychedelicscene.com, what makes psychedelic music psychedelic? And this is written by 2 editors on the site. This is a wild one, and it was a good attempt, and I think that's actually the origins of essay. It comes from the French, and it means an attempt. So they tried, and it's just about as hard to define as the psychedelic experience.
Yeah.
I think they did pretty good. And this guy, Jason LaValle, is one of the editors, says, I can't say exactly what psychedelic music consists of, but I know it when I hear it. Which is pretty funny, because that's reference to some like porn litigation or lawsuit, and I think the Supreme Court. It's like I know it when I see it, kind of thing. It's like the line from the famous Supreme Court judge.
Yeah, he had another quote there. Just the psychedelic experience itself is ineffable. The music style is also incredibly difficult to describe.
Mm-hmm. Jerry Garcia defined it, psychedelic music, as rhythm and blues with a whole lot of weirdness. And I was thinking about this earlier because I'm like, I've been to a lot of Phish shows, I've been to a lot of shows that you could call psychedelic, but what is the quintessence of it? And it's complicated. It's super weird. It's not always tonal. It's not always like traditional pop music. It breaks mold. And it can make you feel a little funny.
When you think of like what you considered psychedelic music, I mean, you're definitely in the music world a lot more than I am. Mm-hmm. Who comes to mind?
Like Sun Ra, Herbie Hancock, Grateful Dead, Jerry Garcia, Phish, STS9, Spangle, like, of course. A lot of the psytrance movement is really interesting and big. But what I call psytrance psychedelic, maybe at times, like there's some really weird sound effects at sometimes. And it was designed for 24-hour psychedelic rituals.
Right.
So, like, that's a big deal.
I feel like some of that stuff is like a little too driving, but yeah, when you're trying to stay up all night and rave, you probably need that driving kind of factor.
We should really do a thing on psytrance as like a scene. It's like it's quasi-religious, if not explicitly, and like you're doing initiations and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, right. It's like super driving. But if we're talking about like for breath work, we'll use Philip Glass and like the classics and some really big stuff. And some of the tracks I wouldn't describe as psychedelic.
No, definitely not. I don't think I've used a few Spangle tracks in there, but not the most psychedelic tracks. Like there's what's that one? I love that Hammock Therapy. It's just a flute. It's a really great transitional piece, and it's just flutes, and you feel like you're just in a hammock.
Yeah, that's good. And what is it that makes it psychedelic? I think jazz is kind of inherently psychedelic because it breaks the mold. And there's so many people that still don't like or understand jazz at all. And it's like, well, guys, you've been listening to like Yanni and all these like soft jazz people forever. You just don't call it jazz. It's still very informed by jazz. Sun Ra, Herbie Hancock, wild. And doing new innovative stuff. I think there's something about novelty for me.
Yeah.
Like even the Mars Volta, are you familiar with them a little bit?
I never really got into them. I'm a little familiar with them, but
terrifying, but brilliant. Afro-Cuban rhythms, like amazing jazz inspired. Like there's some metal elements. There's some just incredible vocals. That to me is like incredibly psychedelic. And yeah, like they kind of just ran through all these effects, right? Like side to side flange pedals, like tremolo, and just like weird composition or weird use of tapes. Like, there was a story I heard recently. I think it was Animal Sounds, the Beatles album. Beach Boys. The Beatles came over and said, "You need to teach us how to do this." Like that was new and like really broke the mold. And if we're trying to answer this question, like we should look to history, but we should also look to like what's going on right now.
Yeah, there was a quote in here. It says, no one single of those criteria alone, and Joe was just reading off some of that stuff, is sufficient. But when several factors apply, the song or album typically passes the acid test. And with all that in mind, there remains a subjective quality as you, the listener, are free to choose your venture, discover which music strikes you as being psychedelic. And it's true, right? Like there's definitely some albums where you have more psychedelic songs than others, and maybe it's just one track on there that's like really psychedelic for you, and the rest of the album maybe not so much is there. I don't know, it's been fun. I've been listening to the Beatles channel on my drives over to Breck from the past. And just hearing a lot of the history of them, it's fun hearing some of these talk shows and people talking about stuff and the experimentation that they did, and just I haven't listened to the Beatles in a long time. I kind of like went through my phase, my early 20s, didn't really listen to them, and now I'm getting back into them and listening to some of these like old songs. I mean, especially from Sgt. Pepper's and whatnot. I mean, yeah, very psychedelic, and really cool because there was a lot of experimentation there, and just a lot of like quirkiness. Like, what's that one, like number nine? I mean, that is a weird song.
It's pretty far out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and trying to think of something more contemporary that's really weird and really popular. LS Dream I saw on fucking Ellen DeGeneres. I'm like, what the fuck? It was like the
no idea who that is.
Design. It was like I didn't know who they were. I just said LSD on Ellen. Like, kidding? Like, what? And I watched it and I was like, oh, they're actually a surprisingly popular act. And it was like on daytime fucking Ellen. And there's a Beatles thing that came up. I was watching this video Elle pointed out to me. It was Paul McCartney has this habit, like when somebody starts like really annoying him or says stuff he doesn't understand on the show, he eventually is just like, yeah, like he starts like scratching his head like this. And it, like on camera there's like a lot of it. There's like a real lot.
It's awesome.
And he does it so well. It's incredible. Yeah, but this song, and then okay, let's go look from another perspective. Like, where do Icaros fit in, or like medicine songs generally,
right?
Or peyote music, or it's interesting because it's trance and it's not necessarily included in this analysis.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's like, does it foster an experience of some sort, right? If you listen to Icaros, is it, I mean, obviously most of the time you're under the influence. I'll make that generalization. Obviously, sometimes people are in the Maloka and they don't drink medicine. But, they can still have an experience. Or what about like repetitive drumming, right? That can invoke a trance state. Is that psychedelic, where you could invoke this trance state and have visions of something, go on like an internal journey through repetitive drumming, right? I don't know if that would necessarily fall under like the music that they're trying to describe, but it's like a technology that helps to change brain waves, and that's really fascinating.
There's this Grateful Dead song called Space and Drums. Familiar with that?
Is that where they're like incorporating some of those, like Mickey Hart is like doing those space sounds and like
probably? So I don't think it's ever been done the same twice. And it's like really weird and experimental, and it's often at least 15 minutes, if not 30, and you're just like strapped in and lost. Especially if you're on LSD or something like that. So
I think I saw one of those crazy drum sessions at a Further show a number of years ago, where it was just like, it was like their session break and then just out there drumming. And I mean, it was trippy, they had like the gongs, the drums, and you're just like, what is going on right now? If you're under the influence of psychedelics, that gets really big and really weird. And I've seen Fish do similarly complex stuff to just get people really lost. Yeah. Please help. Please save me at a certain point. And I think there's some character building that can go into that. It can also make people have to go home. Right. But like, I think generally speaking, it's an amazing part of the experience there. And I wonder if like some of the criteria too is like, does it foster an experience without a substance? So like I think about like all the times I dragged my friends to go see Spangle, and I mean, people would leave and pretty sober and be like, what was that? Like, what just happened? I feel like I was tripping, and it's like you just got spangled by the Spangletron, and that is an experience in itself. Exactly, and that's the pinnacle of it. You and I went to those Spangle shows, and that was like, that was life-changing. Like, so much to pay attention to too, right? You have like the light shows, you have the live art, you have like all the expressive art that's like happening on stage, like those weird slinky guys bouncing all over the place. Then you have the music itself, and it's like all those elements combined, you're like, it really transports you into another world. Let's do this next one real quick. It's for real. Yeah. So psychedelic music, who knows? I'm glad these folks tried to figure it out.
So next up from Vice is having some serious issues lately. Sorry, everybody at Vice. But DMT users are using AI to draw the strange beings they meet while tripping by Tamlin McGee. Yeah, DMT users are using things like Midjourney and DALL-E. David J. Brown's in the mix here. Cool.
Yeah.
So, David J. Brown, who did Women of Visionary Art and a whole bunch of other books, and Sarah Finn, who I don't know, did this one. That's interesting. So they cataloged 27 DMT entities in a new field guide.
Pretty fascinating.
I think that's the right move. You know, how else are we going to characterize these things? And I'm reminded of European and Middle Eastern spirit traditions where that was part of it. You actually are cataloging the spirits you meet. And I think this 27 DMT entities, this is interesting because it's just the tip of the spear. There's probably a lot in there. I think DMTX is going to do some interesting exploration there once Danny McQueen and crew can do it.
And they explained it in the Vice article that, they were looking at some of this stuff that happened over at the Center of Psychedelic Research at Imperial College with extended state DMT, and how, being able to keep people in there a little bit longer. And then entity encounters became frequent at 10 minutes into the infusion. And then they also talked about, different types of entity encounters. But they're also referencing a paper out of Imperial that published a paper based on thousands of entity encounters, finding most interactions to be positive, involving benevolent, comforting, protecting, or outwardly caring interactions. So similarly, at Johns Hopkins, meeting autonomous entities in interactions that ooze with joy, trust, love, and kindness. But they did also talk about some of these experiences where people blast out outside of the universe. They get to the edge of the universe, blast out, and then they end up on like an operation table with like the Greys over them, like the Greys as being the aliens.
Shit happens.
Or like praying mantises.
Wrong. That could be weird.
Yes. It's just fascinating. And I also appreciated that they included this experience called the hyper slap. And that's when you have an unpleasant experience out there and the entities actually tell you to stop doing it so much. And this is Sarah. She was saying, I think there's any number of beings and dynamics, and it's like a jungle in this dimension. There's going to be ones that are friendly and not so friendly. And I've definitely had those experiences where it's like, what are you doing here? Like, go back, go do stuff. And it's fascinating. Like, what is that? Is it an actual reality, or is it just some interesting construct of the mind? And I don't know. This topic has always fascinated me, and I don't really know how to make sense of it. But it's cool to see like people are trying to, create art with AI with it. But then that brings up interesting questions. What does AI know about extra, like, transpersonal dimensions and entities and stuff like that?
They may eventually, the AI gods may eventually have like a human interface where they can experience it through, but TBD.
Yeah. Can you give an AI DMT?
You can. I don't know if it does much. But David J. Brown has a good quote here. We thought that it would be helpful and fun to create an illustrated naturalistic field guide classifying the different alien species from other planets or dimensions with pictures and descriptions for identifying them. And smart idea. Like, awesome.
Well, I think that helps to bring some comfort too to people that have these types of experiences. I remember after the first ever kind of psilocybin experience that I had that I've talked about on this show when I was like 19 or 20, and having one of these kind of entity encounters, finding something online and seeing something visual that was similar to like what I saw and hearing other reports about it, that made me so fascinated, and also made me a little bit more comfortable of going, oh, thank God somebody else has seen this before, and I think there's something nice about that, and instead of being all alone in it and thinking like, what just happened, and I don't know how to explain this. Who do I talk to? I mean, I think there is something in the human psyche that finds comfort in knowing something, right? And so if maybe you do have a catalog like this and you're scrolling through, you go, oh yes, I can relate to this. I'm not going crazy.
Yeah, cool. I think we're good on that one. And just really briefly, I didn't even get to prep you on this, but I posted some kind of material recently on socials about psychedelic exceptionalism and gotten a little bit of shit from some people. I pretty much wanted to just get people thinking again about like how should we think about ourselves as psychedelic users relative to other drug users. And this is the Carl Hart conversation. This is like, the real enemy is not the other drug users. It's those people need to get help too. It's the people that are harming them willfully and on purpose, like trying to hurt these folks. And big biotech, once big biotech comes in, it's not going to be a strong ally for us. Right. So yeah, I don't know, like any kind of like just thoughts.
I mean, I saw some of the comments. I did see some of those threads. And to some degree, I'm hearing people say psychedelics are completely different than doing something like heroin. And yes, the experience is different, right? But I think what we try to get at with this psychedelic exceptionalism topic is that the drug war is harming all sorts of people. And, to just focus on... Yeah, and somebody was like, "Why don't you just call your what was that Riley?" It said,
"Jesus, Riley,
call drugs today."
We've threatened to call it drug war today.
But it's important, right? Because if we're just and there's our co-host, Dex. Hey, Dex. It's like. Then we're kind of like shaming other users in some of these substances to maybe not be able to get help, right? And it's like, I don't know. I always come back to the drug war and just thinking all the harms it's having. And, psychedelics is just one, portion of drugs and medicines that people use. But, there's still people getting arrested and their lives are being harmed and dying and overdosing and not getting support. And
because of the drug war.
Yeah. So
and is heroin bad? I think this good bad category is outrageous. Like it's someone's preference. Some people can do it for 60 years of their lives and have no problems. Others, because of unsafe supply, bad needles, not cleaning them, bad ed, like there's problems. So yeah, like how do we have compassion and also just like I'm so special because I'm a psychedelic user? Like how do we kind of limit that a little bit?
Well, I'm just thinking about like some of the shame around substance use and, if it is labeled bad, are people going to come out and get help? I mean, when you say like heroin, good or bad, I think about all people in my town that I've lost. And again, I mean, that's just... It's ridiculous, like how many people died in my town due to heroin overdoses. But it's like if it wasn't so stigmatized to talk about, to try to get treatment, if we didn't just put those people in this "you're a bad person because you use that substance" type of box, would that impact their own self-worth, impact how they would want to receive treatment? Do they have a lot of shame and guilt around using, and then so you stick in a vicious cycle of it? So I think we do have to be a little bit more compassionate towards people that are using other substances that may not fall in our wheelhouse. We're like, oh yes, I would do that, but how do we have more compassion for people that are maybe struggling, self-medicating? Like how can we help to change that narrative? So I don't know, when I think about psychedelic exceptionalism, that's like the kind of stance I take from it, and really kind of more approach it from a drug war perspective. Obviously drugs are going to have way different effects. Some may not be pleasant, and you may not like it, and you may label it as bad, but some people may love it. Like I remember when I first had morphine when I was in the hospital, I hated it. I thought it was like the worst thing. I didn't take it. I just sat there in pain the entire time. I didn't like the weird dream state it put me in. And it just, I don't know, it was too weird for me to enjoy. But
yeah. And, is LSD different from heroin? Yeah, 100%. Is it Are mushrooms different from methamphetamines? 100%. What's better or worse? It's context dependent. Like, for somebody with extraordinary ADD, maybe an amphetamine is the right move. If somebody's in pain, maybe an opioid is the right move. And who am I to tell them they should go to jail and ruin their lives and multiple generations downstream from them? So read Carl Hart if you're confused about this. Both books are important, I think. And if you don't have time for that, you can listen to our podcast we do with Carl Hart. I think it lays the story out quite nicely. And yeah, it's just, I really dislike seeing unintelligent conversation on this topic from our colleagues, our people in this fight.
Well, and I could just imagine maybe when you do muddy the waters, like, you know, does it kind of get in the way of certain policy change when it comes to psychedelics, of all the forward movement, and then you're trying to like lump things in there. But I don't know. I think, yeah, again, we're fighting the drug war in general. And I think that's important.
And political practicalities do. Yeah, our office manager is getting a little impatient, so we'll have to roll soon. But there are political practicalities around dismantling the drug war, right? Like, Colorado chose plants because it was politically practical, when most people that I know who worked on it are willing to have this more nuanced view on the drug war. So yeah, anyway, I think that's enough for now. But again, Carl Hart podcast on our show, and then his books, incredible. So please get yourself educated on why we're taking this kind of attack. The DEA even admitted they started the drug war for racist means. It's on one of their exhibits at their museum. Really wanted to go visit the DEA museum, but try to stay away from feds. But I'm trying to soften also.
Yeah, and again, as much as I love to see psychedelics like legalized, decriminalized all over the board, again, I think about all the people that passed in my town, and thinking about like, what if there were other systems in place? What if the stigma wasn't there? Those people would still be alive, I think.
What if they knew what they were using?
Yeah,
like there's so many things that we could have done. So. And Kylestown is one of many thousands in the United States with this problem. So, I haven't even checked in on my hometown. I'm sure it's not a pretty scene. Wow. All right. With that, let's
dog
wrap
biting.
it.
little puppy nibbles.
All right. So everybody check out the Neuroscience Demystified course at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. We'll be back soon with our next episodes. Thanks, Kyle.
All right. Thanks, Joe.
All right. Until next time, everybody. See ya.